the petitioners before this court dash Association for Democratic Reforms and the Communist Party of India bracket Marxist bracket dash instituted contempt proceedings instituted a petition invoking the contempt jurisdiction of this court against SBI for an alleged willful disobedience of the order of this court. Full stop. In support of the application by SBI, I've heard Mr. Harish N. Salve, learned senior counsel. Full stop. Mr. Salve submitted that the information which was which was received by the SBI was maintained in two separate silos and were maintained with the utmost secrecy so as to fulfill the core purpose of the electoral bond scheme. Full stop. Learned counsel submitted that if the disclosure is to be made of the information required to be submitted by SBI to ECI in the separate silos which are referred to in B and C of the operative directions, there would be no difficulty in SBI doing so, which, it has been indicated, would be completed within 3 weeks. However, it has been submitted that the difficulty of SBI arose since it construed the directions of this court in requiring it to carry out a matching exercise to match the donor details, the donor and bond details with the corresponding details pertaining to encashment by political parties. Full stop. While evaluating the submission which has been made on behalf of SBI, a reference to some of the key aspects of the scheme would be in order at this stage. Full stop. Clause 7(4) of the electoral bond scheme stipulates that the information furnished by the buyer of an electoral bond shall be treated as confidential by the authorized bank and shall be disclosed only when called upon to do so by a competent court or upon the registration of an offence by a law enforcement agency. Full stop. Thus, in terms of the provisions of the electoral bond scheme itself, SBI is mandated to disclose information when demanded by a court. Full stop. What remains to be seen, what has to be analyzed is whether SBI is justified in seeking an extension of time. Next. SBI seeks an extension of time on the ground that the process of open inverted commas decoding the electoral bonds and matching the donor to the donations into inverted commas complete is a complex and time-consuming exercise. Full stop. To substantiate this argument, SBI has a word that next line A, information is not available in a digital format. ये underline कर दीजिए. Clause 7.1.2 of the standard operating procedure regarding the sale and redemption of electoral bonds stipulates that, into inverted commas, no details of bond purchaser, including KYC and other details, will be entered in the core banking system, into inverted commas complete. Thus, the details of the purchases of bonds are not available centrally, semicolon. B, the donor details and recipient details are available in two separate silos. ये underline कर लीजिए, colon. The details of the purchasers of the electoral bonds were kept in a sealed cover at the designated branch. These sealed covers were deposited in the main branch of SBI in Mumbai at the end of each phase of the issuance of the electoral bonds. Full stop. The information on the redemption of electoral bonds, into brackets, that is the original bond and the pay-in slip, bracket, was stored in a sealed cover and sent to the SBI, Mumbai branch. Semicolon. C, matching of information in the two silos is a time-consuming process. Underline कर लीजिए, colon. The matching of the information on the purchase and redemption of electoral bonds would be time-consuming, since donor information and redemption information is maintained in two distinct silos independent of each other. Semicolon. D, there is a large there is a large number of data sets to decipher, underline, colon. A total of 22,000 odd, I'll give you the figure.
22,217.
A total of 22,217 bonds were purchased between 12 April 2019 and 15 February 2024. Full stop. This would cumulatively add up to 44,434 data sets, since there are two silos of information. In other words, the compilation of this information would be a time-consuming process. Full stop. Next main para. The crux of the submission of the SBI is that the matching of information to ascertain who contributed to which political party is a time-consuming process, since the information is maintained in two separate silos. Full stop. Now, the operative directions which have been issued by this court, as reproduced earlier, the operative directions of this court directed the SBI to disclose the transactions as set out in direction B and direction C extracted above. Full stop. SBI submits in its application itself that the donor details and redemption details are available, albeit in separate silos. Full stop. In other words, the directions which have been issued by this court require SBI to disclose information which is already available to it. Next para. At this stage, it would be material to refer to the FAQs on electoral bonds published by the SBI, which states that the Know Your Customer documents must be submitted by the purchaser each time that the bond is purchased, irrespective of whether the purchaser has a KYC verified SBI account. Full stop. That is, वहां फुटनोट दे दीजिए और उसको FAQ क्वेश्चन नंबर 16 जजमेंट से मैं आपको बाद में बताता हूं कहां से लेना है आपको. That is one set of documents, into brackets, the electoral bond application form, KYC documents, and pay-in slip, can, bracket complete, can only be used to purchase one electoral bond. Full stop. Contributors who have an SBI account, as well as those who do not, have to submit the electoral bond application, Know Your Customer documentation, and proof of payment through NEFT, check, or demand draft. Full stop. Thus, the details of the electoral bonds which have been purchased and which have been directed to be disclosed by this court are readily available. Next. The FAQ, similarly, the FAQs on electoral bonds published by the SBI with respect to the redemption of bonds states that each political party can only open one current account for electoral bond redemption. Full stop. The current account would be opened by the political party only in 4 authorized branches in Chennai, Kolkata, Mumbai, and New Delhi. Full stop.
There are 29, factually, nothing turns on that.
All right. 29
designated branches.
29 designated branches.
Yes.
Full stop.
They're in the 4 cities or other places also?
No, all over the country. all over the country, madam, not in these 4 places.
Thus, information about a political party's encashment of electoral bonds would be stored only in these branches, which would be clearly accessible. Full stop.
Slips and other details.
Slips and other details would have to be, would have to be submitted to the
Dream Sports presents News 18 Rising Bharat Summit in partnership with Hindustan Times. Coming soon.
Association for Democratic Reforms
charts which
and
we saw were
the Communist Party of India Marxist dash instituted contempt proceedings, instituted a petition number invoking the jurisdiction, invoking the contempt jurisdiction of this court against SBI, enable the disclosure of details, willful disobedience. The submissions of SBI in the application, full stop, sufficiently indicate that the information of the application to be disclosed by the court is readily available. I've heard Mr. Harish Salve, learned senior counsel. In view of the above discussion, full stop, the miscellaneous application submitted, filed by SBI, that seeking an extension of time for the disclosure of details, the information which was, and redemption of electoral bonds, that the information until 30 June, which was received by the SBI, is dismissed, was maintained in full stop. SBI separate silos directed to disclose and were details are the glows of maintained and was maintained with the utmost secrecy so as to the business hours fulfill the core purpose of the electoral bond scheme. 12 March 2024. Full stop. Learned counsel submitted that as regards the ECI disclosure, we direct that ECI shall compile the information of the and publish the detailed information in its official website submitted by SBI no later than by to ECI in the separate silos which are referred to in B and C of the operative directions, there would be no difficulty in SBI doing so, which, it has been indicated, would be completed within 3 weeks. However, it has been submitted that the difficulty of SBI arose since it construed the directions of this court in requiring it to carry out the matching exercise to match.
Welcome back. The Supreme Court's 5-judge Constitution bench is hearing the case on the electoral bonds. We're given to understand the Supreme Court has now dismissed the petition by the SBI for an extension of June 30th to put forth the details of these electoral bonds to submit it to the Election Commission. That plea has now been dismissed, but what this means, by when do they have to furnish more details? We're still awaiting information on that. Remember, there was a deadline that was set by the Supreme Court last month. First, for the SBI to furnish all of these details to the Election Commission, and then for the Election Commission to put it out on their website of who had donated how much to whom. All of those details
7(4)
were to be furnished by the SBI. Harish Salve, senior advocate who was appearing for the SBI, had claimed that they wanted more time. They sought an extension until the 30th of June. That petition has now been dismissed by the Supreme Court. Let's cut across to the hearing.
shall be treated as confidential.
Ananya, my
by
colleague,
the
joining us, getting us more
authorized
details.
bank.
Ananya, the petition has now been dismissed. There is
And
no
shall be
extension as
disclosed
far as SBI
only
goes.
when
But by
called
when
upon
do
to
they
do
have to
so.
now furnish these details to the EC?
By a competent court.
Well, definitely it's a big setback that has now come in for the State Bank of India, which had sought an extension till June 30. However, today, what has very clearly happened is that the Supreme Court has turned down this particular application by the State Bank of India, and the deadline to submit this data is the close of business hours of March 12. That is tomorrow. The SBI will have to submit this particular data with regards to these electoral bonds, and very clearly and categorically it is a big and massive setback coming in for the #1 bank in the country, from the topmost group of the country, because the Supreme Court believes that the data that it has been seeking can easily and is readily available with the State Bank of India, and that should be given to the ECI until March 12, before the closing of the business hours of March 12. That is almost around 5 p.m. tomorrow is for the deadline of, in fact, submitting this particular data has been given. The submissions that the data is complex in nature. There were 2 silos that were there, and it would be very complex to, and a tedious exercise to actually collate that particular data. All those submissions have fallen flat. The submission that were made by Mr. Arisal has fallen flat to the ground, as the Supreme Court has turned down the application filed by the State Bank of India. Poonam.
So another 24 hours to go before these details have to be furnished by the SBI to the Election Commission. Now, the March 13th was deadline for the Election Commission to put out this information on their website. Does that deadline still stay, Ananya?
Well, the Election Commission of India has been asked to, submit that particular data, upload that particular data on the website as soon as possible. As and when, it would be supplied to the ECI, the data that would be supplied to the ECI by the State Bank of India, the ECI would actually, when I quoted from the order, the Supreme Court also asked the ECI to publish the details of the information supplied to the court as per interim order. The interim order that was passed, there was certain information that the Election Commission of India was asked to disclose with regards to how much of political funding, how much of electoral bonds funding have various political parties received, and that data would have to come up on the Election Commission of India's website very soon. So, big directions coming in this particular case, and very clearly and categorically, the Supreme Court does not seem to pathways with the submission of the State Bank of India, did not accept the demand that was made by the State Bank of India to extend the time to submit this particular data by June 30th. So very clearly and categorically, it's a big and massive setback coming in for the State Bank of India in the electoral bonds case, where the Supreme Court's 5-judge bench headed by the Chief Justice of India, Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, has turned down the application filed by the State Bank of India, very clearly stating that the details that the Supreme Court had sought in its particular order are readily available with the #1 bank in the country, and that should be submitted to the ECI by the end of tomorrow, by the end of working hours of tomorrow.
Right, some scathing observations were also made by the CJI there, going on to ask what exactly the topmost bank of the country was doing for the last 26 days. Why was this delay there in the first place? Was a pointed question the Supreme Court bench had to ask of Arisal. We do stay on with us, Ananya. Pallavi also joining us, getting us more details. Pallavi, political ramifications as far as this setback to the SBI goes?
On the redemption of electoral bonds.
Absolutely, but this is also something which is the opposition party certainly will say we stand vindicated. If you remember, Poonam, ever since the decision was taken about the SBI going back to the Supreme Court asking for more time, the opposition parties had said the entire purpose of this has been defeated, and SBI is actually something which is controlled by the government. It is a public bank, so why is it that the government is not doing anything about it? And it had accused the BJP and the government of trying to hide the data. At that point of time, Poonam, Finance Ministry sources had told us that we cannot do much in it, we cannot intervene in this entire matter. The entire verdict by the Supreme Court on the electoral bonds issue in the first place is something which puts many of the corporates in a bit of a spot. It also goes against the banking laws procedure because of the non-disclosure clause also. But now whatever the SBI has to do, it will have to do on its own. The government doesn't step into this.
Distinct.
Absolutely. So the political war words will continue there. Ananya continues to be with us, also getting us more details. Ananya, we're given to understand the Supreme Court has now gone on to say that if the SBI does not comply with its directions, that is, provide all of these details to the Election Commission by the end of day tomorrow, then the court would have to think about taking action against the bank.
There is a large number of data sets.
Well, definitely, the Supreme Court is very, very clear. A
decipher
stern warning has now been
underlying
given to the State
stolen.
Bank of India. If at all, it does not comply
total
with the
of
directions that were given by the Supreme Court in its order today, they might face a
22,000
contempt proceeding.
odd.
They've, at this
Again,
point of
92
time,
figure.
not started a contempt proceeding, which were
A total
sought
of
by ADR.
22,000
However, has very, very
217
clearly and
bonds
categorically stated that if this
were
timeline
purchased
is not
between
adhered to, if this timeline is violated
12
by the
April
State Bank of India,
2019
then contempt
and 15
notices
February
might also
2024.
follow. And in fact, contempt proceedings would follow on the number
This
one bank
would
in the country.
cumulatively add up to
It is the number one bank of the country. How
44,000.
can you not get your affairs in order was
434.
something that the Supreme Court also
Data
hinted at.
sets.
What were you doing for the last
Since there
26
are
days
two
was a
silos of
question the
information.
CGI had to ask of Harish Salve. From 3
other
months
words,
to 3 weeks,
come on.
different
The
arguments were
compilation
made as to more
of this
time being
information
required, but
would be a
all of those
time-consuming
arguments did
process.
fall flat, with the Supreme Court setting a deadline of the next 24 hours
Next.
for the
Next
SBI
meeting.
to provide all
The
of
crux
these
of the
details
submission
to
of
the
the
Election
SBI
Commission, which then would be put on
that the
the
matching
ECI
of
website
information
before the announcement of election dates.
to
Arunima also
ascertain
joining us on this broadcast. Arunima, as
who
far as the
contributed
timing of all of this is concerned,
to which
that was something
political
of
party
an issue
is
between
a
political
time-consuming
parties. The
process.
fact that it was coming right before the announcement of election
information
dates is something that
is maintained
the opposition said is something that the
in
BJP didn't want to happen.
two separate silos.
Yes, the opposition has got a shot in its arm. Back-to-back two incidents that have happened. The opposition is trying to
Now
use
the
that to target the Bharatiya
operative
Janata Party, to
directions which
target
have
the
been issued
government.
by
The
this
first
court
thing, of course, was the setback
as reproduced
from the
earlier.
Supreme Court itself as far as the electoral bond issue was concerned. The government said we have nothing to do with it. It's for the State Bank of India to decide. But the opposition did
The
not let
operative
go of the
directions
opportunity.
of this
They kept
court
asking that why is SBI taking so much time?
directed
What
the
is the
SBI
information
to
that they want to
disclose
hide? Some even pointed out that
the
today when you're talking
transactions
about digital
as set out
transactions everywhere,
in
why is it taking so much
Direction
time
B
to furnish this data that Supreme Court
and
had
Direction
asked?
C
Second, of course, the resignation
expected above.
of the election commissioner. So those two issues were put together by the opposition to say that this
SBI
is an attempt by the
submits in
government
its application
to
itself
try and influence the elections, and the Supreme
that
Court,
the
as per
donor
the
details
opposition,
and
is not
redemption
really
details
playing ball. So now, with the Supreme Court
are
once
available.
again rejecting State Bank of
Come on.
India's
Are we going to
request
separate
for more time,
silos?
even rejecting that request that Harish Salve
Except in
made,
other words,
that at least if you don't want to give us that
the
much time, give us
direction
2
which
to
will be
3 weeks,
issued by this
some
court
part of the
required
order we can then
SBI
implement. Even that falling
to
flat,
disclose
the
information
opposition is bound to sharpen its
which is
attack. Keep an eye on the
already
social media
available to it.
platforms. Expect all political
Next slide.
leaders from the opposition spectrum to come out and go all
At
guns
this stage, it
blazing
would be
against the government.
material to refer
Right,
to
Arunima,
the
do stay on with us. Aman joins us on
Refugees
this
on the
broadcast as well.
electoral
We're cutting
bonds
across to some reactions coming in from the Supreme Court first.
published by the SBI.
has dismissed the application of the State
Which
Bank,
states
pointing out that the data that the court had asked them to give is already available
That
with the State Bank.
know
According
your
to their
customer
own
documents.
affidavit, they have to just submit the details
Must be
of the
submitted.
donors on the one hand and
By
the details of the parties
the
which
purchaser.
redeemed the bonds on the other hand. State Bank was saying we have to do the cross matching,
time
etc.
that the bond is purchased,
Court has said you don't need to do the cross matching, just give these
irrespective
details
of
to the
whether the
election commission
purchaser
and you have to give it by tomorrow.
as a KYC
And thereafter they
verified
have said
SBI
that the
account.
State Bank chairman should file an affidavit to this effect. They are not yet taking any contempt action, but they
That
may
is,
have to if the State
Now
Bank
put that
doesn't
video.
comply.
और उसको
They have also
question
said
number
that the
16
Election
जल्दी से मैं
Commission
आपको
should
बाद में
publish
बताता हूँ,
all
500
these
में आपको।
details which have been given by the State Bank about the donors
That
and
is
the
one
parties
set
which
of
have received the
documents.
bonds by
Into
15th
brackets,
of this month.
the electoral
And also
bond
the earlier
application form.
details which were supposed to be
Among
given
KYC
by
documents.
political parties to the Election
clean
Commission about the bonds received by them.
Can
Even
bracket
those
it be-
details have to be published
can only be
by
used to purchase
15th of this
purchase
month. So
one electoral bond.
it's a very good, strong judgment
Contributors
in consonance with
who
the
have an
earlier
SBI account
strong judgment that the court had given
as
on
well as
electoral
those who do
bonds.
not.
आज सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने
Have to submit
इलेक्टोरल बॉन्ड्स के मामले में
The electoral bond application
You're tuned in to CNN
Know
News
your
18, and this is the
customer
big story that we are tracking right here on the broadcast. Supreme Court wrapping
And proof of
SBI and
payment.
saying that no further delays but to furnish all the
every
details of the electoral bonds
Have been
by
done.
tomorrow. And now this has been the big story
But
since
thus,
the morning with the Supreme
the
Court
details of the
hearing the
electoral bonds
petition
which
by
have
the
been
State Bank
purchased.
of India, who did say and pleaded to the
And which
Supreme
has
Court
been-
that they would need
and which
more
has
time to
been- and
furnish
which
more
has been
details.
directed to be
They would need
disclosed
more
by
time
this
to
court.
match the donors. But the Supreme Court hearing
readily
none of that
available.
and saying that
all that information has to be disclosed by tomorrow. Let's go straight across now to all of CNN's News 18's correspondents who are tracking the story extremely closely. We have Arunima, we have Pallavi Ghosh and Aman. Pallavi, this is a big story coming, but let me go straight across first to Ananya, who has been tracking the story from the court. Ananya, a big blow to the State Bank of India. They in fact had wanted more time. They had pleaded to the Supreme Court for time until the 30th of June, but the Supreme Court having none of it and asking them to furnish all those details. Now, what can we expect tomorrow?
Well, definitely, by tomorrow, this data needs to be submitted before, in fact, the Supreme Court, and the data has to also go to the Election Commission of India. Very clearly and categorically, stern warning also coming in from the Supreme Court, a 5-judge bench headed by Dr. Justice Divachan Chud, the Chief Justice of India himself, very clearly and categorically stating that if at all this direction, this timeline is not adhered to, then the State Bank of India might be facing this particular case, though a contempt notice at this point of time has not been issued. But this whole timeline has to be adhered to, and very clearly and categorically those submissions which Mr. Habib Salve appearing for the State Bank of India submitting this exercise of matching the donor contribution with the particular political party is something that is a very tedious and cumbersome exercise. Is something that the Supreme Court did not find way with it. In fact went on to go into the details of the previous hearing, after which that particular judgment had been passed. The electoral bond scheme was actually said to be unconstitutional.
And Ananya, matching those donors, matching the details was never really the requirement by the Supreme Court, isn't it? That was one thing that the SBI in its petition had been using to seek for more time, alleging that is a tiresome process. That is something that would take place. The Supreme Court having none of it, rubbishing that claim, saying that they only want plain disclosures.
2024.
Well, definitely, the Supreme Court very clearly saying that it only wanted plain disclosure, no cross-matching was actually necessary. And this data that the Supreme Court had actually sought for is something that was readily available with the State Bank of India, and it does not understand as to why the SBI is facing difficulty in disclosing it. In fact, it went on to the procedures as to how this data can be actually retrieved. It went on to the FAQs of the SBI, where it was stated that the KYC document can actually reveal the UIN number, that unique identification number 2 can actually reveal the details that the Supreme Court has been seeking, and that's the reason why very clearly and categorically, not even in fact almost a day's time has been given. March 12, the business hour concluding is something that has been set as the deadline for the State Bank of India to submit that particular detail, and then the Election Commission of India to actually furnish that particular data later on its website is something that the Supreme Court is very clearly and categorically gone on to say. Not only that, a stern warning from the topmost of the country, from the 5 judges bench, in fact, that if at all this timeline is not adhered, then definitely a contempt proceeding can follow on the #1 bank, the biggest bank of this particular country.
Absolutely. Arunima, my colleague, is also with us. Arunima, that's the criticism, that the opposition has often used to attack the government. They have always maintained that the financial system into the Indian election methodology is opaque. It's a way to funnel black money into Indian elections. So today they stand vindicated, and they're going to use this to sharpen the attack against the government ahead of the general polls.
Well, absolutely. And for the opposition, there are two things that have happened over the last fortnight, which is giving them more ammunition to attack the government. One, of course, is the Supreme Court order as far as electoral bonds is concerned, rejecting the State Bank of India's request for more time. Even that request, like Ananya was pointing out by Harish Salve, that at least give us 2 to 3 weeks to bridge some parts of your order. Even that getting rejected, 24 hours time is all that the SBI has. So that is opposition's arm number 1, which they will use as ammunition to attack the government. The second, of course, is they have been constantly questioning the functioning of the Election Commission of India itself, especially after the Election Commissioner's sudden resignation and this meeting which has now been
Arunima, just kindly stay on with me. A lot of political reactions coming in. In fact, I'm joined now on the phone line by Professor Shogota Roy. He joins us now, the Trinamool Congress MP. Sir, your first reactions on the Supreme Court's judgment asking the State Bank of India not to delay and to furnish all those necessary details regarding the electoral bonds.
It has been indicated would be completed within 3 weeks.
Criticize what the State Bank is doing.
However,
it should not
it has been submitted that the difficulty
many days to reveal the names of those who had
since it construed the directions of this court requiring it to carry out
the State Bank is acting
a matching exercise
as a
to match
frontal observation
the donor details,
I hope that
donor and bond details
I hope that the
corresponding
Supreme Court
details pertaining to encashment
surely
full stop.
Right, Mr. Roy. Thanks so much for joining
That's
us. I'm
okay.
going to go straight across now to Aman. Also, he's joining us. Aman, the government had in fact defended that policy sharply, saying that it mitigates the use of cash or black money in the political financing of elections, and now perhaps they could find themselves on the back foot with the Supreme Court asking State Bank of India to furnish all those details.
Well, Avantika, there's bound to be extreme politics on this. There is political season, elections that just surrounds. Obviously, the opposition is going to take digs at the government. If you remember, the order which came in February had fixed a date of March 6th for the SBI to furnish the data to the Election Commission, and was asked about Election Commission to publish the data by March 13th. What I think the Supreme Court has taken really offense at is that just 2 days before that deadline of March 6th, the SBI comes to the court and says, look, we can't do this. And it also seems a misinterpretation of the entire court order, because the court had never asked for this cross-matching or correlation. It had simply said, you have the donor details, these are KYC tax details, just disclose them.
Yes.
So clearly SBI did not interpret the order maybe correctly. What had happened, we don't know, but clearly the Supreme Court now saying that, disclose it within 24 hours, by the end of day tomorrow, because you have this data ready, just give it to the ECI, and the ECI has been asked to publish it by March the 15th, just 2 days beyond the earlier deadline of March the 13th. So really the Supreme Court has given no leeway at all to the SBI or to the Election Commission. The data is coming as per the original deadline, obviously. The opposition was asking that why is the SBI asking for a date of June 30th? Is it to avoid any kind of controversy during the election process? That was the big point raised by the opposition. And the Supreme Court has now laid it to rest. This data will be public on March 15th, right in the middle of the election season, before maybe the elections are announced, and this will give ammunition to the opposition parties, maybe even to the BJP, Avantika, that who has donated to the Congress may also now come out in the open, who has donated to various of the parties, the TMC and Aam Aadmi Party may also come out in the open. So in a way, all political parties would be a bit wary of this information coming out in the open right in the middle of the election season, because it gives a handle to another party to take pot shots at it.
Oh, absolutely. Pallavi, my colleague, is also with us, and Pallavi, one doesn't really know as to what really comes out tomorrow with the State Bank of India being firmly instructed by the Supreme Court to disclose all those details. But this clearly comes as a shot in the arm for the opposition, who have been gunning the government ahead of the polls. And like Aman was saying, this is also going to trigger some big political reactions.
Next line, A.
Absolutely, and we are also getting the first reaction which comes in by way of the government sources is that SBI is an independent banking operations, and therefore to insinuate that a government is going to dictate the disclosures or it's going to embolden them is absolutely incorrect. The finance ministry has never wanted to get involved in this, Avantika. If you remember, when this news was first broken out, that information which we had got by way of government sources then also was that there is no situation where the government can come out with an ordinance, but there are concerns in some quarters that this is a contradiction of the banking procedures. Look, whenever you make donations, the cardinal rule of that is that this is going to be confidential. The one who's making a donation wouldn't want to be his name or identity to be revealed, because there are political implications of this as well.
Yes.
And that was one of the conditions which was attached when this entire idea of electoral bonds are concerned. But that is something which we talked about in the past. Immediately, of course, what government sources are saying is that you cannot say that it's going to be a setback to the government, because this is a directive which has been issued by the court to SBI, and the SBI will have to follow the procedure. As far as we are concerned, everything is open and transparent. That's how the government runs its economic policies. And there is a non-disclosure clause, but that's for the corporate and the banking sector to sort out amongst themselves.
But on that point, as you rightly mentioned, that was the whole point of electoral bonds, to keep the names anonymous. But now the Supreme Court asking for those names, who had made the purchase, who has encashed those electoral bonds. Once that data is submitted to the Supreme Court, can we expect all of that coming in the public purview?
At the end of each phase of the issuance of the electoral bonds.
Ananya?
I mean,
yes,
I'm sorry, Avantika, if you could repeat your question. Yeah.
No, let me just actually ask that question to our legal correspondent
and the
Ananya, who's
redemption
been
of
tracking this
electoral bonds.
story so closely. So Ananya, just explain this to
Into
us, break
brackets,
this down for
that
us.
is
You know, electoral bonds was supposed
original
to be an
bond.
anonymous affair. If someone has to
And
make
the pay
buy
is
that bond
bracket.
and make a contribution to the
Was
party,
stored
that
in a
name would be
sealed cover
anonymous. So what happens now
and
with the
sent to
State
the
Bank of
SBI
India disclosing
from a
all those
Mumbai branch.
details, furnishing all those details to the Supreme Court of
Semicolon
India?
C.
Will all of those names be
Matching
out there in the public
of
domain?
information in the two silos.
Well,
It's a
definitely,
time-consuming
the
process
data would come out. The Election
underlying
Commission of
political
India
code.
would actually furnish that particular data, because if you
The
remember,
matching
when the Supreme Court
of the
had passed the
information
judgment
on
on
the
February
purchase
15, turning down this whole
and
scheme as
redemption of
unconstitutional,
electoral
saying that it
bonds.
is violative of Article 14 of the Constitution of India, the major argument why this was held
Be
to be
time-consuming,
unconstitutional is that this kind of anonymity
donor
cannot
information
exist in a particular democracy,
and
and that's the
redemption
reason,
information
transparency should be there when it comes to
is
governance,
maintained
and that's exactly
two
why there has to be the disclosure of
silos
the donors who have donated via
independent
electoral bonds, and that's the
of
reason
each
why in
other.
fact the State Bank of India was
Semicolon.
asked to furnish that particular. If you remember, when this particular hearing was taking place, interim order was also passed
There is a
where the
large-
data with regards to how much how much of funding have political
there is a
parties
large
received
number
by way of electoral
of
bonds was
data sets
actually given by Election Commission of India. That was also
to decipher
published. Is
underlying
what was very clear, and now finally the data with
total
regards to
of
who has donated and how much have they donated to a particular political party via electoral bonds is something that we'll get to know after the SBI would furnish this particular data to, in fact, the Election Commission of India, and a copy of it would also be, I think, given to the Court of Law for its own consideration and to match up with the court records. But very, very clearly and categorically, this is a big setback that is coming in for, in fact, the State Bank of India. Not only a setback, but also with a clear warning that if at all this deadline, this timeline is not complied with, then contempt proceeding might follow against the managing director and chairman of the State Bank of India.
Indeed, a big blow there for the State Bank of India that had moved court to extend the deadline for the disclosure till the end of June, citing various difficulties in data collection and also matching all of those names. I'm going to take a short break right here on the broadcast. Okay, we're going to stay on this story. Aman, coming to you now. This is expected to open a can of worms, isn't it? All eyes will be now on that list. Who got what? How much did one get? And this is coming at a time when the elections are just a few weeks away. This is bound to trigger, a storm of a lot of allegations, counter allegations, and one will have to watch the space rather closely.
Now
obviously the opposition would be training its guns now, because obviously the large part of electoral bonds has come to the BJP. BJP claims that since it's 50% plus land masses ruled by it in the country in various states, 50%, more than 50%, close to 60% donations have come to it. But there are other parties also, like the Trinamool Congress, like the DMK, like the Aam Aadmi Party, whose a high proportion of their income actually was through electoral bonds. High part of donations have come through electoral bonds. So the BJP would also, I think, be keenly awaiting.
Stay on with me. Kindly stay on with me, Aman. I'll just come to you. A. Saravanan from the DMK is also joining us. Sir, your first reactions on this big news coming in from the Supreme Court, asking SBI to furnish all the details and disclose all the information regarding those electoral bonds.
Yeah, it's a slap in the face for the corrupt BJP. They have taken the lion's share of the entire share of the electoral bonds.
The directions which have been issued by this court require SBI.
So they are responsible, and not just this. There are investigative reports which say that the firms which have been subjected to ED, IT and CBI investigations have donated more to the BJP party. This is pure extortion. And the BJP, I don't think they will be able to come out of this fiasco, which is their own made fiasco. And we'll also come to know what the quid pro quo that has been doled out by the BJP for the amount that has been received by them. Of course, the Supreme Court has said that you don't have to match the donor and the party, but we'll be able to know, because nobody else. See, if it is going to be 6,000 when they have more than 5,000 crores. earned through the electoral bond.
Mr. Saravanan, I'm just curious. I just wanted to ask you, why are you training your guns at the BJP? Because this could be full disclosure. A lot of political parties perhaps could have benefited from these electoral bonds. Where is this information that you have that the maximum number of or the large chunk of the money that probably has benefited the BJP from those electoral bonds is from the BJP?
It is in the public domain. It is in the public domain. See, it is actually the amount of funds received by the BJP. And
that is one set of documents.
The Congress does not even have 10% of the funds of the BJP.
Bond
So it is naturally the BJP which have to be scared.
KYC documents.
They are going to be scared, and the scrutiny of the public. The Prime Minister so long has been maintaining a veneer of anti-corruption, and everything is going to crumble when the list is released. It is the BJP which has to fear, not anybody else, because whatever the other parties have got in the last 10 years,
have an SBI account,
when it is compared to what the BJP has got.
As well as those who do not.
The acid test for the BJP, and which they are not going to recover. Already the anti-incumbency against the BJP government is sky high. When this corruption scandal hits them, they will not have anywhere to run.
Right, Mr. Saravanan, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. I'm going to go now to my colleague Pallavi. Pallavi, so all of the opposition parties training their guns at the BJP, saying that they are the ones who have largely benefited from the electoral bonds, but the list would be out, the information would be out only by tomorrow. And clearly, as Aman was also rightly mentioning, all political parties will have their eyes firmly fixed on just who benefited from those electoral bonds.
And also, Avantika, let's not forget that the Congress party has also lost that case in court, that income tax tribunal, and they have always been making the point that, look, we don't have any money, we've not been able to generate any money, and a paucity of funds is an argument which has often gone in by the Congress party. And in fact, one of the main reasons why this entire crowdfunding idea was raised by the Congress ahead of the Lok Sabha elections is that, unlike the BJP, we are not stacked up with donations of funds, and therefore we have to approach the people, and their tagline really was that if you want democracy to be reinstated in the country, then you have to contribute to make that reinstatement. Now, if the figures which are going to be released and put out by the SBI and on the Election Commission of India's website by 15 does reveal that there has been a large amount or substantial amount of donations to the Congress party, this gives an opportunity to the BJP to begin to attack the Congress and question its own argument that, you know, we don't have money, we are not cash rich like the BJP is. Look, corporates give political donations to across party lines. There's nothing new about it. Everyone is aware of that. And it's also a statewide thing. A political party may want to give funds to one a corporate may want to give donation to, say, a party A, which is in power at the center, but they may give to party B, which may be in power at the state level. That's how political donations work. The entire idea of electoral bonds was to make this donation transparent. So there is no black money, there is no subterfuge, nothing is confidential. That was the entire idea of electoral bonds. So now is doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani, and that is what, if you see that there has been a large amount of money which may have gone into Congress's kitty, the BJP certainly will not keep mum on that.
So, Aman, which brings me to the next question, that how something which sounded rather noble to clean up the political system, to ensure transparency, has now come under the scanner, with the Supreme Court coming down rather heavily on the State Bank of India and asking them to disclose openly just who received how much.
Right of the people to know above everything else. They say the people who vote for these parties, who vote for the candidates, have a right to know that who donates to whom, what money has come to which party through what channel. People have a right to know, and that is the basic premise of the SC judgment. If I give you some figures, Avantika, which you were mentioning earlier, the BJP, since the inception of the electoral bonds in 2017-18 till 2023 financial year end, received about 6,565 crores, 6,565 crores through the route of electoral bonds. The second biggest recipient is the Congress, which has received rupees 1,122 crores, 1,122 crores through electoral bonds. The third biggest recipient is the Trinamool Congress, which has received rupees 1,093 crores through electoral bonds. Even Biju Janata Dal has received about rupees 773 crores. DMK has received rupees 617 crores. Aam Aadmi Party, a new party, has received about rupees 95 crores through electoral bonds. And the proportion of earnings through electoral bonds, the donations proportion is much higher in the case of the regional parties, be it the AAP, be it the DMK, or be it the Trinamool Congress. So in a way, every party has benefited from electoral bonds. BJP has benefited more because obviously BJP rules more states, BJP is in power in the center, it rules more of India, so obviously it's got the lion's share of the electoral bonds, but every party has got it, and I think every party has a reason to worry when the details come out that who's donated to whom, because this opens a Pandora's box for everybody to take pot shots at everybody that look, not just us, even you have been taking corporate donations, and you also have much to answer.
Absolutely. Swapnil Kothari is also with us right now on the broadcast. He's a lawyer. Swapnil, break this down for us. The Supreme Court today junking the State Bank of India's plea, asking them to furnish details, in fact reprimanding SBI for the delay in disclosures. What exactly had led to the delay all this while?
Exactly. I mean, that is what the Supreme Court was bemused with, that particular application, and it said that just 2 days before the deadline, you come knocking at our doors and asking for some extension of time without showing in the application as to what sort of progress you've done since the past 26 days. So the best way to put forth in an application, whenever you seek an extension of time, should be that this is the progress that I've done so far, but nevertheless I'm stuck here. That's the reason why I need end of March, end of April, end of May, or end of June. Whatever the time, the length of the period of the time. And sometimes we as lawyers always ask for end of June because we know we won't get it. So somewhere we'll get it around end of April. But then if you do not show that progress road that you've taken, then it just amounts to some sort of a fictitious, arbitrary humbug application, which the Supreme Court will not, find any merit in. And that is exactly what the Supreme Court said to the State Bank of India, that what have you been doing? And to Mr. Salve, it said, who made these oral arguments, that, who said that, there are some complications and there are some separate silos of information and all of those things. So these are very ambiguous arguments, which all lawyers tend to make, and nothing wrong with that. But nevertheless, I think if I would have been there, I would have never even advised the State Bank of India to file this application, because it is a mere waste of their time and judicial time as well. And I'm sure this would have been over in about 5 to 10 minutes. And if at all it went on about 10 minutes, then I believe that the Supreme Court has indulged you and been generous with you. Otherwise, let me tell you, if we make these sort of applications in 2-3 minutes, these kind of applications are generally done and dusted with. But given the fact that it was of electoral bonds and the judgment that it had given, and it has a wider impact and greater ramifications on the society, I think the Supreme Court must have indulged them for at least 10 minutes to hear both sides properly, this, that, and the other.
Which they
and
did.
then must have come out with this judgment.
Which
yes,
they did, Swapnil.
And
Absolutely. And, Swapnil, Chief Justice MC Chagla had cautioned against the influential role of, I'm quoting him here, quote unquote, big business and money bags in choking democracy, urging courts to prevent any improper or corrupt influence. He said that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 1958. Now, electoral bonds were supposed to bring in transparency in the electoral process and less, amenable to corruption. I'm just wondering, why have things come down to what we are witnessing today, with the Supreme Court reprimanding a public bank like State Bank of India, asking them to furnish all those details, makes those disclosures public for the voter?
Well, absolutely. The reason is very simple. Because it's a well-known bank, because it's a public bank, because it is so reputed that it has got wider ramifications, that's the reason you should have been more cautious and more prudent in not coming to the Supreme Court, for which is already a given. You should have just done this by tomorrow, end of 5 p.m. and then the Election Commission on the 15th of March by 5 p.m. to upload the details on the website. That's where they want to put a quietus to this issue. They have given a judgment against electoral bonds on the grounds of opacity. It has junked them. They have also set aside the results of the Chandigarh mayoral election process. They have also given a judgment that Article 105 and Article 194 of the Constitution do not protect legislators if they have taken bribes. The bribe for vote kind of a judgment that the Supreme Court had frowned upon and had done that. So it is paving the way for a proper democratic polity where the voter is the king, and the right of information flowing out from the right to freedom of speech and the right to free press, which of course if the press disseminates freely, so does the voter, or do we know things freely. So the Supreme Court is clearly setting the bar very high and saying that this far and no further, and let's put an end to this. We've got more pressing matters in the time to come, and let's end this now, once and for all.
Right, Swapnil. Thank you so much. Absolutely, and thank you so much for joining us. Arunima, the Supreme Court's order to the State Bank of India is bound to trigger a massive political slugfest, isn't it? Now the opposition will be gunning for the government saying, well, this was meant to ensure transparency, we have nothing to hide. But Aman was just pointing out and giving us those numbers. Clearly the BJP has enjoyed a major chunk of that pie as far as donations in the electoral process is concerned?
See, I can tell you what the opposition's game plan from here on would be. It's not about who has received how much money alone. It's also about whether there was any quid pro quo. The DMK spokesperson was speaking to you earlier about this. Trust me, as soon as this data goes public, you will see the opposition pointing this out again and again. Of course, the Bharatiya Janata Party is in power for 2 terms now. This allegation has been made by the opposition that central agencies like CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax, the opposition has said that these agencies work as the arm of the ruling front. If they can by any way establish, the opposition that is, that not just contributing to the party fund of the ruling dispensation, but also receiving some kind of a quid pro quo, then the game gets cleared even more, and that is what the opposition's game plan will be. Soot boot ki sarkar jibe happened earlier also. Crony capitalism allegations have been made earlier also. That is what they are hoping to do. That once the data goes public, once Election Commission of India website gives out the data, the opposition will try and build a case that all these people who did not see a CBI raid, an ED raid or an IT raid benefited because they contributed. All those who did not contribute in turn got the sleuths knocking at their door. But we'll have to wait and see if this proposed game plan of the opposition will work or not once the data is given out.
Absolutely. Stay on with me, Arunima. Ananya is with us as well. Ananya, you've been keeping a very close watch on all the developments since the morning. Tell me something. Now what happens next? What can we expect? The State Bank of India is bound to comply with the Supreme Court's direction. Facing north, they would, doing north, they would face contempt of court. When can we expect that information to be out?
Well, definitely this deadline, this timeline has to be adhered with by tomorrow, and the SBI will have to submit this particular data, else its managing director and chairman can very well face a contempt in this particular case. Remember that all the submissions by Mr. Salve, that the SOP that was adopted to keep this anonymous, to keep the data pertaining to the contributions through electoral bonds anonymous, was dumped by the Supreme Court very clearly and categorically, stating that the data that the Supreme Court was seeking is very readily available with the State Bank of India, and it does not understand as to why it is not complying with it. It's the best bank in the country. In fact, it's the #1 bank in the country, and why can't it handle it is something that the Supreme Court had questions to ask on. In fact, it also asked as to what were they doing for the last 26 days, why that particular information as to how much of data has been matched in the last 26 not been mentioned in that particular application. The Supreme Court finding no merit with the application filed by the State Bank of India. But Avantika, let me take you through that particular order that was passed, the whole genesis of this whole issue, the order of February 15th, and various observations were made by the Supreme Court in that particular order. One, coming in that the political parties are a relevant unit in the electoral process. Information about funding of the political parties is essential in the electoral choices. Not only that, it also went on to say that the EB scheme is not the only in fact a scheme to curb black money. There were other alternatives that were measured, because remember the government had constantly said that electoral bonds is a measure that was adopted in way to curb down black money in politics. However, the Supreme Court did not find way with that particular submission, also going on to say that non-disclosure of voluntary political contribution is something that is violative of Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India and also Article 14 of the Constitution of India. These were some of the major observations, following which the Supreme Court had termed the electoral bond scheme as unconstitutional, violative of Article 14 of the Constitution of India, because it was transparent. It wasn't transparent and was particularly opaque in nature.
Absolutely. It was a landmark decision when the Supreme Court, in fact, had declared those electoral bonds by the centre to be unconstitutional. And today, the Supreme Court also rapping the State Bank of India for all of the delays, asking them to furnish the details by tomorrow itself. Karthi Chidambaram has also given a reaction on this bit of news. Let's listen in.
Welcome this judgment. From the first instance itself, the SBI should never have filed this application seeking for extra time. And the largest bank in India, which has a huge IT budget, it is most unbecoming of them to say that they need more time to compile this data. And I'm glad that the Supreme Court has called their bluff and asked them to submit all the information by tomorrow.
Sir, how do you see the NCB's move? Because they now say that money was given by Jafar Sadiq to DMK, calls it political funding.
But this is not the role of the NCB. The NCB must simply, if they have a case against a particular individual, they must file their
Okay, with that, we're headed into a short break. We will continue on this big developing news. Stay with us. CNN News 18 will be right back in just a bit. Welcome back. The Prime Minister is in Gurugram today. He is there to inaugurate the Dwarka Expressway. In fact, he is there to ensure that the travellers and commuters are bettered off. Now, the Prime Minister there is inaugurating the Haryana section. He's seeing a model there, that what you're seeing on your screens right now. He's seeing a model of the entire, what I presume is the expressway and how exactly it would help the commuter, how exactly will it help to enhance traffic flow and alleviate congestion between Delhi and Gurugram just along the National Highway 48. So this is a big project. It's a massive project. He's inaugurating this landmark Dwarka Expressway, which is expected to improve traffic flow and definitely ease congestion between Delhi and Gurugram. This is National Highway 48. As you can see there, the Prime Minister waving out to all the people who have gathered to catch a glimpse of their Prime Minister. And he's not just only on the expressway, he's also going to be inaugurating and laying the foundation stone of more than 100 national highways